Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Marcel Rodarte. You knew him as the mayor of Norwalk, a councilman in Norwalk. Well, guess what? He has left elective office. He is now the executive director of the California Contract Cities Association. Congratulations on your new job. What happened? What made you make the move?
Well, it was a spur of the moment decision. During one of our executive board meetings, we were looking for a couple of years for a new executive director. And
someone pointed at you and said, "How about him?"
No, as a matter of fact, I rose my hand and I said, "Hey, I asked the executive board if I would be willing to resign my elected position, would you all consider me as the executive director?" And it was unanimous.
Wow.
So I put together a proposal, formed my own company, and now I have a contract to act as the executive director.
But it's a big move. I mean, you were seen as a strong leader in Norwalk.
Yeah, thank you.
With potential aspirations for a higher office. Not to say that you couldn't still do it, but you're now on a different path.
Yes.
So what made you make that leap?
So for me, I never went into elective office to be an elected official for the rest of my life. I was going to do it for a finite amount of time. I was going to do as much as I could to improve my community, and if that involved me eventually moving to another office, and so be it. But that was never my aspiration. And so when this opportunity came about, it's an opportunity to really have a lot of influence in the entire region and not just the city of Norwalk. So I still get to help Norwalk,
of course,
but I get to help about 70 other cities.
So for our viewers that are not familiar with the organization, what is the California Contract Cities Association?
Sure. So the California Contract Cities Association, it's a local government association. We do advocacy on behalf of our member cities. Right now we have about 70 or so, and the membership varies from year to year depending on budget issues and that type of thing. Right now we're actually growing. We just welcomed Glendale as a new member, which is the third largest city in LA County.
And what defines a city as a contract city?
So the original model was any city that contracted with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Now it's any city that contracts for any service, whether it be trash hauling, it could be IT services, it can be anything that a city contracts for, and there aren't any cities anymore that don't contract for one service or another.
So why does cities who contract need an organization like yours? What is it about the unique nature of that contractual relationship that necessitates advocacy?
So for us, unlike the larger organizations that advocate for government, we're much smaller. We're very LA-centric. We do have some cities that are outside of Los Angeles County, but we're much more agile. We're able to focus on an issue that will have an impact on our member cities and really address that issue head-on quickly. We're able to essentially turn on a dime, if you will.
I see.
And so what it does is there's power in numbers. So if we come as an LA County consortium of all of these cities, with all of the folks that live in those cities, 70 million people, we can go up to Sacramento and we can influence change. We can go to LA County and influence change on behalf of all of our member cities.
But is there something unique about the contractual relationship that brings you together, or is it a method to join?
Yeah, I think it's just one of the things we share. As I said, and so anymore, we're getting cities that were traditionally known as independent cities, cities that provide their own police and fire services. But again, they all fit into that contract city model because they all contract for some service or another.
So I want to talk about an issue that deals with the liability that cities will often incur as a result of litigation. There's something called the Liability Trust Fund.
Right.
What is the Liability Trust Fund?
So the Liability Trust Fund is a fund that was set up in about 1999 or so when the cities actually we started getting involved with it in 99. So ever since cities started contracting with the Sheriff's Department, there was a fund that covers the initial part of any kind of liability, whether it be a deputy-involved shooting or any kind of litigation that has to do with law enforcement within the 42 contract cities in Los Angeles County. So the fund was set up to help offset the costs and also pay for insurance that's related to any of those types of lawsuits.
So it's essentially a fund that will pay out settlements, judgments, and like you said, it's an insurance policy.
Correct.
So as I understand it, cities that choose to participate, which I guess there's a special liability trust fund just for your organization within the LA County family, they contribute a certain amount every year. And then if there's litigation that requires payout, they don't have to take it from the general fund. They can go to the Liability Trust Fund.
Correct.
How has it worked so far? Has it been successful?
So it's been great so far, but as you know, nationwide there's a sentiment with law enforcement, and there's a growing trend of this anti-law enforcement sentiment. So what we're finding now is when we end up in court with some of these lawsuits, some of the settlements are much higher than they used to be, and it's very dangerous for us to go to court. And in the old days, let's say in the early 2000s, when we would go to court for something, you could be fairly confident that the settlement wasn't going to be too big or wasn't going to be too damaging to the fund. And these days, you just can't tell anymore.
Look, there's no doubt that as a result of a variety of incidents, be it in Ferguson, be it in Baltimore, wherever it may be, New York, that law enforcement has seen better days in terms of the public perception of them. And so I see what you're saying in that cities, governmental entities, nervous to go to juries with these cases. They could have massive judgments.
Huge.
And so the settlement amounts will tend to be larger. So what does that mean as it relates to the liability trust fund then?
So the danger for us now is we're seeing a huge increase in the amount that cities have to pay. And so the liability trust fund is based on a percentage of the overall contract for each city. So different cities have larger contracts. Let's say
Contracts with the sheriff,
with
for
the sheriff's
example?
department,
Okay.
yeah.
So this is focused exclusively on litigation related to the sheriff or general?
Yes,
okay.
correct.
So
Yes.
it's just litigation.
Yeah, specific to the
for
sheriff's
law
department and
enforcement.
any kind of liability that goes with that. So as we've seen, depending on the size, it's a percentage of that. So now what has happened is we've had a couple years where there was actually zero. There was zero paid into it because the liability trust fund was so robust that there was enough money in there. So the cities weren't charged, and they said, "We'll take a couple years off and try to help your budgets through the hard economic times." And now what we're seeing with the actuarials, we're seeing a 9%, going up to 11% potentially next year, and all the way up to 19% in the next couple years.
In 1 year, you're seeing jumps to 9, 10, 19.
Right. So we're seeing like 2 to 3 or 4%, and then 7 or 8% increases in the next coming years. So over the next 4 years or so, we'll eventually be up at 19% of the entire budgeted cost for your sheriff's contract. Now, as you can imagine, it's going to put cities in a place where they either have to cut services, they have to release deputies, and none of us want that.
I mean, it feels like the situation that's going on with CalPERS or CalSTRS or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So what can be done?
So what we're doing is, it's a huge goal of our association this year. Our president, Lou Lamont from Malibu, is really driving this issue. So we're having meetings with the sheriff's department, with their contract law folks, with actually Jim McDonald, the LA County Sheriff, to really sit down and say, what is it that we can do to help offset these costs? What can we do, going back with the county, with the Board of Supervisors, to get their attention and say, what is it that we can do to help mitigate these costs? Is it funding body cameras? Is it funding everything that goes with those body cameras, right?
Who
To reduce
decides
risk.
how much needs to be paid into the fund?
There's a study that's done by the contract law folks. They have an independent study that's done, and they determine what they estimate the costs will be.
Is there a debate about those costs? Is that at issue?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of the debate is what these contract cities are responsible for and what the county is responsible for. So we have things that go in with like discipline. There are things that are associated with, if there's a deputy who the county sheriff's department knows that there's been an issue with, and then he's involved in a shooting, let's say.
That is tricky. So let's say there's a shooting in Norwalk. I presume you're a contract city. The sheriff, the deputy sheriff, works for the county, but it happened in Norwalk. Who's responsible?
So all the contract cities are responsible ultimately, right? And so depending on how it works out.
Because of this fund.
Yeah, and so all the contract cities get to share a cost in it, and there are other cities.
Does the sheriff's department pay into the liability trust fund?
They pay into the part, like if you're in an unincorporated area, let's say it's a deputy out of the Norwalk station, but they're in Whittier.
Okay.
So that didn't actually happen in a contract city, so we wouldn't be liable for it. It's only for issues that happened within the boundaries of a contract city.
This is complicated.
It very.
And so where do you go from here? Are you sensing consensus or are you sensing acrimony?
I think there's going to be a lot of pushback from the county.
Okay.
We have a long way to go. Anytime you deal with money and cities coming in saying we don't want to pay this much or we don't feel we should be paying this much.
Should the insurance companies get involved?
The
Or is that
insurance
really not their issue?
Yeah,
question?
it's not really their issue, but they are involved in the sense that they expect a certain amount of risk reduction, risk management. The body cameras is one of them.
His name is Marcel Rodarte. He is the new executive director of the California Contract Cities Association. I'm Brad Pomerance, Charter Local Edition.